All right, how's everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. This channel is for education. And in particular, we focus on great theories of everything, ancient and modern, primarily obscure, and things that cosmologies, all-encompassing theories of everything, grand unified theories, and magnum opuses, and tour de forces, and earth-shattering discoveries that you probably don't know about. And we try to take a deep dive into them to allow you to suss it out and figure out how you can use these things in your life. And we are reading the epilogue of, this is episode 26 of the book called It's After the End of the World, Don't You Know That Yet? Which is on two groups of relatively obscure jazz musicians, and in Chicago in the mid to late 20th century, who kind of redefined their mission in life, their profession, their calling, and steered it to a spiritual purpose that can be fulfilled if the listener knows what's going on and knows how to use the music in the right way. And so it's, it's like a paradigm shifting thing. And but the epilogue is primarily autobiographical, and so we're going to keep going on as long as we kind of are getting something out of it. I think we'll give it at least another day. So all of these episodes of the drama revealed how entranced I was by my society. The list of dangerous, stupid, and disrespectful acts I committed were not the product of an evil impulse. Upon reflection, I felt guilt and remorse for much of what I had done. The reason I did these things was because I was obsessed with fitting in, and these actions were calculated to impress my most alpha white male friends. I was jockeying for position in a hierarchy based on so-called blade values, the frontier and manifest destiny, but also the outlaw trickster legend. I did these things primarily to fit in as smoothly as possible. An explanation was that I was following in the footsteps of my father, whose fitting in was much more of a matter of survival. My father's skin was a few shades lighter than mine. He found that he was able to pass as white, quote, pass as white in most situations, including the Air Force, where he advanced to a level that few blacks ever reached at that time. In civilian life, he worked for one company, moving up the ranks without bringing his race into consideration so that he could advance without resistance, such that the boss didn't even know he was black when he retired after 35 years with the company. For my father, his livelihood and his family came down to fitting in as smoothly as possible with the values of his superiors. For me, too, I was keenly aware of the boundaries and the actions that would enable me to be one of the guys. At least once, I told a nigger joke, attempting to pass, even though my skin color belied my words. More often, my actions did not evince the values of white supremacy, but of the cool, uh, counterculture that had me wanting to fit in with the rebel image by embarrassing authorities and flaunting the defiance of authority. Underneath all of these attempts at fronting, of giving an image of something rehearsed, while hiding or masking authentic expression or not being in touch with it at all, was a much deeper me. I was not consciously coming to grips with myself and my situation, but my instinctive actions were such that I was searching for something with much more meaning, something that reflected the elements of the world which held fascination and an organic sense of wholeness. This hidden secret aspect became quite developed because of my family situation. We lived in the doldrums of the crime-free white suburbs. I was an only child, and both my parents worked full-time. From the age of 5, I was left at home with no babysitter when there was no school. In this protected but independent environment, I had freedom to decide what to do with my time. Looking back, this experimental environment gave me the chance to develop strategies for action and to make decisions in pressure-free situations. On the other hand, it left me vulnerable to a host of potential excesses and temptations, many of them stemming from the nexus between the freedom to consume and the mass media. The television found me a captive audience as I tried to understand my surroundings. I watched everything, and I learned that it was rebellious and sexy for women to smoke, that women loved macho men like Fonzie and John Travolta, that athletes should flaunt when they win and be surly when they lose. I learned to combine romance and melodrama with my happiness. From the soap operas and black and white movies that I watched when no one was watching me, I found myself identifying with the neurasthenic characters of female protagonists really on most any show that I watched. At the same time, I was entranced by the ads, filling me in on the norms of the society, what was expected of me. The television also reflected many more valuable elements that I learned through my explorations into the universe. My favorite subjects were astronomy, geography, mathematics, and logic puzzles, no doubt due to the influence of my parents, and many of these were accommodated on the television, particularly in sports and cartoons. Within the secret world that I was developing in and around my house, I developed a very eccentric and idiosyncratic outlook on the world. Even though I have never really seen magic or supernatural actions in front of my eyes, I still had some sense that I believed in them. My most clear sense of this came from my understanding of numbers. They could be infinitely large, infinitely small, and they always worked out. I would sit around and with pencil or in my head figure out numerous hidden patterns within the structure of numbers. I was obsessed with playing logical games that tried to solve math problems and puzzles. I was particularly enthralled by statistics and bent over backwards on numerous occasions to determine the odds that such and such a thing would happen. I was also tuned into the mystical nature of color. In fact, from an early age, my mind was as comfortable thinking in numbers and processes as in words and phrases. And as you might guess, I'm left-handed. Many of the numbers really began to have meaning for me to describe a function in the world as well as a quantity. My understanding of numbers came together in my other interests through game making, game playing, and game spectating. My love of spectator sports was really related to many different kinds of potential learning, but the most important to me were number and color and shape. My favorite athletes were my favorite based upon their number, the color and design of their uniforms, and their style and shape of movement, largely to the exclusion or at least ignorance of their character or personality as individuals. Moreover, the teams that I rooted for were sometimes based on their uniforms, including their number. If numbers have no intrinsic meaning based on function, then what was I rooting for? Really, though, sports numbers, shapes, and colors were all a part of my search for numinosity. American life, including church, had been thoroughly secularized. In my case, I was secularized from birth, as my father was a strong believer in atheism. He went to seminary school, and that turned him into an atheist. I rarely attended church growing up, really only when my grandfather on my mother's side, who was a minister, was visiting. I remember going with my mother and grandfather to church on Sunday over my own opposition and my father's, on the grounds that church took so long that I would miss the first half of the early football game. I felt very strongly about this, and all of my friends were in full sympathy. Those who had to go to church were home in plenty of time for the 11:30 NFL Today start time. These suburban, mostly Catholic churches were compact and concise, much better designed for the sporting culture of the suburbs. My friends, in fact, often talked in sporting metaphors about their church services, talking about having season tickets or the same seats every week for church. Frequent gossip was circulated about what so-and-so was doing, saying, or wearing at church. The main thing they did at church was gawk at pretty girls. My father, however, was a refugee from a seminary and made no pretext about heaven or hell, but only that, quote, you just went into the ground when you died. Somehow, though, I didn't believe him. I believed in something, and I didn't know what it was. Invariably, I went after the only thing I knew, which was the Bible. When I was about 16, I read the Bible every night. Eventually, I got from cover to cover, even though I understood little of what I was reading. I kept reading because I didn't really know of an alternative, and I was scared of going to hell. Nonetheless, I found that what I read in the Bible couldn't be taken seriously. God's behavior was not consistent. Jesus' behavior was not consistent. And the whole thing did not strike me as coherent. I was still able to justify it because everyone else believed in it, even if half-heartedly. But I honestly believed more in random occurrence than in some type of active God presiding over my affairs. On some level, I believed that the Creator presided over things by the way random things manifested in my life. If chance came up a certain way, then that was the message I was supposed to intuit, I believed. This way of thinking is in some evidence in the coin flip to start a football game. But I extended these ideas in chance sports games where I determined or simulated the events of a game through rolling dice or drawing cards. I then kept statistics on these events over the course of an entire season. Perhaps my love for figuring statistics came from my penchant for collecting sports trading cards, which documented each player's career in this way. The desire came at least partly from the stick of a heavily sugared bubble gum, that came with every package. Another issue may have been a desire to own a league. When I played dice sports games, it was as if I was the owner or even the commissioner of the league. But mostly my attraction to sports games simulated by chance was a desire to combine numinosity with something that was relevant in my life, to my life. Other places where sports merged with numinosity were in imaginary fantasy leagues and in basketball camp. At these camps, well-to-do white boys and a few blacks, more than I was used to, lived and breathed basketball for a whole week. Legends and myths were told and made at the camp. Sacrifices and disciplines were imposed on the camp initiates so that we could hopefully become charismatic. To me, the vibe of basketball camp was comparable to a church retreat, indoctrination. The camp, however, was only once per year. The rest of the year, sports maintained its numinosity for me through my imaginary league games. I imagined I was the star player and sometimes the coach on a made-up team of my choosing. I played all three major sports, both indoors and outdoors, and acted out the improvised script. I provided the play-by-play commentary and crowd noise. I scored for the opposition. I played both quarterback and wide receiver on the same play. My neighbors wondered what I was doing out in the yard throwing the ball to myself or running and getting mysteriously tackled. Why would I shoot the ball with one hand and block it with the other? Being too young to realize or to understand that I was inviting gossip from others, I showed these games to some of my neighborhood friends. I had full rosters for my team and made up names for the other teams. I even lost occasionally. Soon my neighborhood friends began to play too. One day, after years of playing, all of us decided to reveal the imaginary game to the most manly kid in the neighborhood, and he was most appreciative. And in perhaps the most emotional language I'd ever heard from him, he wondered why we were so apprehensive of showing him our love and fantasies for these sports. The alpha male in my neighborhood was almost offended that I did not share my religion with him. But the reason I didn't was that I was given flack on a number of other occasions from him for revealing other aspects of my imagination, like clothing styles or music tastes. But when it came to sports fantasy, he was reverent and humble. In high school, too, most of my friends and I were quite far from reverent and humble, except when it came to sports. Every day we spent time lying down on the middle of the basketball court where the team logo was painted so that we could get Spartan aura, our school's nickname. Otherwise, our style would be described better as arrogant and obnoxious, which fit our suburban lifestyles. We were able to afford the fundamentals and the most expensive gear, the basketball camps, and tickets for the NBA games. But in truth, we idolized the bravado and showmanship of ghetto ball, at least our portrayal of it. I was an exception to this rule because while I was as cocky as the next person, I was scared to death of playing on the playground with or around ghetto blacks. I felt like inner city blacks blew my cover as I was trying to pass as white. In addition, my mind was influenced by mass-mediated narratives about how black people are violent, stupid, uncivilized, and cannot be trusted. I did not want to be perceived like this. The self-hatred went back a long way to the first years of my life in the all-white suburb. I knew I was different, and I knew I needed to overcome that difference, but I didn't know if I could. I learned the same strategies as my dad. Don't draw attention to your blackness and do things to blend in. Nonetheless, I remember a literature class in like fourth grade when we discussed Mark Twain's nigger, Jim, and upon his mention, immediately feeling all eyes in the classroom focus on me. Wanting to smooth it over, the teacher asked me if I knew how black people became black. I sheepishly answered, embarrassed, that it was because they got tanned. My teacher incorrectly told me I was correct, not understanding that it was white people who got bleached in reality. Events like these conditioned me to panic anytime I saw or referred to another black person, unless they, I lost my place, unless they were a star athlete hero, including my parents. As long as it was just me, I could fend for myself. But as soon as another black person was around, I get into a complex situation. On a number of occasions, my friends would gratuitously call this person nigger, forgetting I was around. Then, when they remembered I was there, they would effusively apologize, embarrassed. Exacerbating matters, the other blacks involved didn't usually care too much for me either, because they thought I was an Uncle Tom, which I was. I hadn't really much of a choice. This situation reached its nadir on the inner city playgrounds. In the summers during high school, we would make the long trek to an inner city park to play basketball games against the black teams. Those games were a nightmare for me, usually because I was too scared to play. These fears were a prominent ingredient to me in my athletic career, which, besides girls, was the only thing that really mattered to me at this time. For so many reasons, I endeavored to excel in sports, but at the same time, I was so afraid of failure and ridicule that my will to achieve in crucial situations was choked and thwarted by a fear of failure. I could not put myself out there and expose myself to be embarrassed. I was more concerned with looking cool. I could express what I wanted to do in words and theory. I could also express what I wanted to do through practice. But in game situations, when the eyes were on me, I was more concerned with vanity. Being an only child and heavily influenced by sponsorship and other media treatments to team sports, I was often unable to grasp the team concept. I was interested in personal stats and glory first, while secondarily caring about the team. I wanted our team to win, but I was more interested in looking good. One of the most important issues for teenagers, and most everyone else too, was that of sex and romance. And I hoped that sports stardom would lead me into the arms of a popular cheerleader. Those fantasies that I held may seem benign and somewhat minor, but when combined with excess consumption and destructive tendencies, ultimately led me into a dead end, a corner that led straight to rock bottom. It is important to remember, though, that while my situation was extreme, nearly all of my friends from the suburb were involved to some extent in this web of self-destruction, which all went under the guise of being cool. Perhaps because of my excesses, I was eventually able to realize that I would eventually be dead, or at least in prison, if I continued in this direction. This was something, however, that I only perceived after several years, really 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, and 3 years of law school, during which I gradually realized a way to extricate myself from the massive abuse that I was committing on my own body and on the body of the earth. This way of thinking about things never really occurred directly to me and had to be pointed out to me ad nauseum very slowly over time. Abuse of the body could be, let's see. Yeah, we'll stop there, and we will pick this up tomorrow and try to figure out exactly what to do with this. It goes on for a while, and I know that there are a lot of parts here that are relevant to this reciprocal church. So I might be skipping a few paragraphs here or there, but we'll keep moving along. All right, thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.